I know this is going to sound petty, like the kind of thing you'd scroll past on Reddit and think, just talk to your wife, dude. But I did. I did, and that door is still locked. It started 43 nights ago. And yes, I've been counting, not on purpose at first. But when something breaks in your house and no one acknowledges it, you start marking the days like you're in solitary confinement. Only in this case, the broken thing was intimacy. The cell was my marriage. Let me explain. We live in a 3-bedroom home. One of those dull, beige houses you drive past without remembering. I work remote. She works in town. Our schedules used to sync like gears. Now they grind like they're made of rusted tin. One night, she tells me she's having trouble sleeping because of my breathing. Not snoring. Breathing. I just need one night in the guest room, she said, to reset my sleep. Fine. Reasonable. That was night 1. By night 5, she had brought in a candle, a weighted blanket, and her favorite mug. By night 8, the guest room door was closing. By night 12, it was locked. I stood there with my hand on the doorknob like some unwanted visitor in my own damn house. I knocked. Everything okay? Yep. Just checking. Pause. I'm fine, Nolan. She always says that now. I'm fine, Nolan, like she's talking to a dentist who just asked if it hurt. The door stayed locked. That's when I started avoiding her. Not to be childish. I just couldn't handle the sound of that lock clicking behind her every night like punctuation at the end of an unwritten sentence. I stopped waiting up. I stopped trying. I stopped knocking. I made toast for one. Coffee for one. I didn't refill the shampoo bottle in her shower. I let her clean her own side of the sink. She noticed. I know she noticed. And then something strange happened on night 17. I came home from a walk and saw the guest room door cracked open. Just slightly. Enough to see the edge of the bed. My heart did this stupid hopeful leap like I was a kid again and Santa had left a gift. I pushed the door open. The bed was made. Candles unlit. Empty mug on the side table. But she wasn't there. She wasn't anywhere. Her phone was gone. Her car was gone. No note. No text. She came back hours later, smelling like a place we don't go together. With that tired, fake yawn she does when she doesn't want to answer questions. Long night. I asked. She nodded. Traffic. That was it. No explanation. No invitation to talk. And you're probably thinking, why didn't you confront her? Because by then, I wasn't afraid of the truth. I was afraid of confirming what I already knew. I wasn't her husband anymore. I was just the man who heard the door lock at 10:07 p.m. every night. That's when I started my experiment. If she was done being a wife at night, I'd be done being a husband during the day. No more coffee deliveries to her desk. No more back rubs. No more asking about her sister's wedding plans. I became wallpaper. And then, on night 23, she knocked on my door. That's when everything shifted. It was 10:07 p.m. again, because of course it was. That's the time the lock usually clicks. But this time it was a knock. 2 of them. Quick, quiet, like she wasn't sure she even wanted me to hear it. I didn't move at first. I just stared at the door, frozen, heart thudding like a slow drum in my ears. I wasn't ready for a knock. I was used to silence. I had made peace with the lock. But a knock? That was an open door in disguise. Another knock. A little louder. I stood up and opened it. There she was, standing in a hoodie I'd never seen before. A green one that looked too big, like it wasn't hers. Her hair was up in a messy knot, and she looked unsure. That alone felt like a stranger had shown up at my door in her skin. Hey, she said soft. I nodded. Hey. She looked past me like she was checking if someone else was inside. Then she hugged herself, arms crossed tightly, and asked, Do you have a minute? I should have said yes immediately. But I waited. Not to be dramatic. I just didn't want to make it easy. She'd made everything hard for weeks. I was tired of being convenient. Eventually, I stepped aside. Sure. She came in and sat on the edge of the bed like it wasn't the same one she used to fall asleep in with her leg draped over mine. I stayed standing, leaning against the dresser, arms folded. I was bracing for something. I just didn't know what. I've been avoiding you, she said finally. That sentence hit me like someone tossing a glass of cold water in my face. Direct. No sugarcoating. No excuses. I know, I said. She looked down, picked at her nails. Then, suddenly, she looked up at me and said, I didn't cheat on you. I hadn't said anything about cheating. I hadn't even asked. But the way she said it, fast, like a defense mechanism, made the words feel heavier than if she hadn't said them at all. Okay, I replied, but my voice cracked. Why say that? Because I know you think I did, she said. And you've been acting like you're already gone, so I figured I should say it before you actually are. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But something about the way she said it felt prepackaged. Like a rehearsed line she'd practiced in a parking lot before walking in. Then she stood up, walked to the window, crossed her arms again. I don't feel like myself anymore, she said. This house feels like a movie set. You're in it, but I don't know the script anymore. Now I was the one silent. She turned to me. I don't know if I want this version of us. My stomach dropped. Not, I don't want you. Not, I'm done. But, this version of us. Like we were some app update she could uninstall. So I asked, what version do you want, Maribel? She looked at me, eyes soft, tired. I want the one where we didn't stop touching each other. Or laughing. Or trying. I almost laughed at that. I didn't stop trying. I was practically doing emotional gymnastics in the living room for weeks while she disappeared into that guest room like it was a bunker. But instead of snapping, I asked her one question. Why the lock? She looked at me for a long time. Then she said the last thing I expected. Because I didn't trust myself. My brain didn't even know how to process that. Not, I didn't trust you. Herself? She didn't explain. She just walked to the door, stopped, and said, you didn't deserve that. I know. Then she left. The door stayed unlocked that night. And yet, I couldn't sleep at all. Because suddenly, I had more questions than ever. Not just about her. About who she was becoming. About what version of me she was even talking to. And the next morning, something happened that changed everything. I got a message. Not from her. From someone I hadn't heard from in years. And that's when the unraveling really began. The next morning was gray. The kind of colorless morning where the sky looks like a blank sheet and everything feels like it's holding its breath. I was standing by the sink, half focused on my coffee, when my phone buzzed on the counter. I didn't look right away. These days, I try to limit the number of things that can ruin my mood before 8 a.m. But something about the vibration pattern, just one, long, unbroken buzz, felt off. I glanced down. Unknown number. No name. Just one line of text. Do you still think she's only sleeping in the guest room? I froze. Not because it was aggressive. It wasn't. It was worse. It was intimate. Written like someone who already knew the answer but was testing whether I'd admit it. My stomach flipped. I reread the message 3 times, standing barefoot in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly too loud. I didn't respond. I didn't delete it either. I just stared at the screen, then looked over at the hallway where the guest room sat. Door open, bed made, 2 made, like no one had slept in it. Like she'd only opened it last night to stage the scene. I walked toward the room slowly. My body felt like it was trying to move ahead of my brain. I didn't know what I was looking for. I just knew I wasn't ready to find it. The blanket was tucked too tightly. The pillow was untouched. I crouched down and looked under the bed. Empty. No socks, no charger, no slippers. No human mess. The closet door was slightly ajar. I opened it. Inside were a few hanging items, mostly untouched jackets and some guest linens. But one thing stood out. A canvas tote bag shoved to the side with a broken strap. I hadn't seen it before. I pulled it out, careful not to make too much noise. Inside were receipts. A ton of them. All for places I didn't recognize. Cafes. Bookstores. A hotel. A hotel. The latest receipt was dated 4 days ago. Late evening. One night. 2 guests. That's when the floor under me cracked, metaphorically, but real enough that I had to sit down. I sat there in the guest room, holding someone else's evening in my hands, feeling like I'd been walking around a stage set that was never meant to hold up under real weight. I wanted to confront her. Immediately. But something stopped me. Not fear. Not rage. Curiosity. Because now I had a new question eating me alive. Who sent that message? I don't have enemies. I'm not the guy who stirs drama. Hell, I can barely send food back at a restaurant. But someone out there was watching this unfold and decided now was the time to push me off balance. I checked the number again. I tried reverse lookup. Nothing. Burner, probably. The message had no follow-up. No threat. Just a nudge. One that landed hard enough to knock the breath out of me. When Maribel came back later that day, everything felt different. She was quiet, but not in the sulking way. Calm. Peaceful even. Like she'd just come back from a spa. She kissed me on the cheek like nothing had happened, then went straight to the kitchen and made herself a smoothie. Banana, almond milk, peanut butter, her comfort drink. She used to only make that when something bad happened. But today she looked relieved. I asked how her day was. She said it was fine. And I just stood there watching her pour the smoothie into a tall glass, wondering who else had tasted that flavor recently. I didn't say a word about the receipt. Or the message. Not yet. Because if someone was playing a game with me, I wanted to learn the rules before I made a move. And I was about to break one of my own. Something I hadn't done in years. I was going to follow her. I followed her on a Thursday. Not because of the receipts. Not because of the phone message, though that was still burned into the back of my mind. I followed her because of the silence. The kind that doesn't feel peaceful, it feels orchestrated. It was raining, not heavily, just that quiet kind of drizzle that softens everything. Maribel left at 5:52 p.m., exactly 8 minutes earlier than usual. I noticed because I was pretending to nap on the couch, eyes half open, listening for the sound of her boots on tile. She didn't say goodbye. She never does on Thursdays anymore. I waited 4 minutes, long enough that it wouldn't look obvious. Then I grabbed my jacket and keys and left through the back door. I didn't even know what I expected. A parked car I didn't recognize. Some guy leaning against a wall. Nothing. My heart wasn't racing. It was just humming steadily, like it already knew I wouldn't like what I found. I didn't follow her in my car. That would have been too obvious. Instead, I used the rideshare account she forgot I still had access to. We used to share it. Then one day, she changed the password. Said it was for security reasons. But she forgot to log me out on my phone. She'd called a ride to downtown. Usual route. But when I saw the drop-off pin, my stomach tightened. It wasn't near her office. Not even close. It was a block behind a hotel. Not the same one from the receipt in the bag. A different one. Smaller. Local. One of those renovated vintage buildings that Instagram influencers like because it has old carpets and Edison bulbs. I told my driver to drop me off 2 blocks away. I walked the rest of the distance with my hood up, rain hitting the top of my head like soft taps from a cautious hand. I wasn't breathing normally. My hands felt electric. This wasn't me. I'm not this guy. I'm not the guy who tails his wife like a private investigator. I'm the guy who fixes her stupid printer at midnight and listens to her rant about copy editors. But here I was. When I reached the corner near the hotel, I stopped, leaned against a newspaper box that hadn't been stocked in years. And then I saw her. She was standing in the alley beside the building. Not in some romantic, sketchy way, she looked bored. She was staring at her phone, umbrella in one hand, scrolling with her thumb like she was waiting for a late friend. A minute passed. Then another. Then a man walked up. I didn't recognize him. He wasn't older. Maybe mid-30s. Sharp jaw. Athletic. Wearing a brown leather jacket and carrying one of those waterproof laptop bags. He looked like someone who gives TED Talks about productivity. She didn't kiss him. She didn't hug him. They just exchanged a look. Then, without a word, they walked around the side of the hotel and disappeared into the side entrance. It was almost elegant, how quietly it happened. No drama. No passion. Just routine. And that's what killed me the most. How familiar it looked. I didn't move for a long time. My legs were cold and my hands were trembling. Not with anger. With clarity. Like something that had been fogged up was now terrifyingly visible. Eventually, I walked away. No photos. No confrontation. I didn't even follow them inside. There was nothing more I needed to see. Because I already knew. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came later that night. When I got home, she was already there. In the kitchen. In sweatpants. Hair wet from a shower. Stirring a pot of soup like her world hadn't shifted 3 hours ago. She turned to me and smiled. Actually smiled, like the woman I married a decade ago. I made that tomato lentil thing you like, she said casually. And I swear to God, it took everything in me not to scream. Because now I knew something I couldn't unknow. This version of her, the soft one in our kitchen, was no longer real. She had practiced it. She had become it. And the only reason she was putting on the mask again was because she knew I had stopped playing the role she expected. She didn't know I followed her. But she knew I had pulled away. And now she was trying to pull me back in. Which meant this wasn't over. It was just getting more dangerous. She kissed me on the cheek the next morning while I was tying my shoes. I hadn't even looked at her. She just leaned down, pressed her lips to my skin, and said, "Have a good day." And I just sat there, frozen, shoelaces tangled in my hands, brain blank. What was I supposed to say? You too. Honey, hope your side guy brings you a croissant. No. I just nodded. She left the house wearing a light gray coat I hadn't seen in a while, the one she used to wear on our weekend bookstore dates, back when things still felt safe. I watched her walk down the driveway like a stranger rehearsing a familiar walk. When the door closed behind her, I stayed in the hallway, still sitting, not moving, just thinking, not about her, about me, about what kind of man I was turning into. Because here's the truth no one tells you. Betrayal doesn't turn you into a warrior. It doesn't fuel you with justice or righteous anger. Sometimes, it turns you into something worse. Something quiet, calculated, petty, curious in ways you didn't know you had in you. I started doing things I'm not proud of. I started going through the trash. Not in a movie scene way. No gloves. No dramatic discovery. Just slow, almost ritualistic lifting of coffee-stained paper towels and shredded to-do lists, trying to find a scrap of something she didn't mean to leave behind. A note. A receipt. A hair tie that didn't belong to her. Anything. I opened her laptop one afternoon when she was out walking. I knew the password. It's my birthday. Funny, right? Not hers. Mine. Like she wanted to remind herself of the obligation. I checked her browser history. Nothing strange. All boring. Articles about productivity. Online recipes. A yoga video. I almost gave up until I noticed the bookmarks folder labeled freelance. She doesn't freelance. Never has. Inside were 3 links. All to the same website. A private messaging platform. The kind people use when they don't want to be seen. Encrypted. Discreet. It asked for a login. I didn't have it. That night, I stared at her across the dinner table, her phone face down, her eyes on the TV behind me. She laughed at something on the screen. I don't even remember what it was. Probably some scripted sitcom line that sounded like real conversation. But it made me sick, because I realized I was watching an actress who had memorized all her lines. And the worst part? She was really good at it. I went to bed early that night. Not because I was tired. I just couldn't look at her. She came in later, tiptoeing like a teenager sneaking in past curfew. Climbed into bed without saying anything. I could feel her body shift under the blankets. I could smell her shampoo, but it didn't smell like ours. It smelled expensive. Foreign. She fell asleep before I did. I could hear it in her breath. And then I did something I've never done in 12 years of marriage. I got out of bed. I took her phone from the nightstand. And I walked into the hallway. I wasn't looking for messages. I wasn't looking for photos. I was looking for him. Whoever he was. The man with the leather jacket and TED Talk aura. I wanted to know his name. His voice. His job. His number. Something. But her phone was locked with Face ID. And for the first time in years, it didn't recognize mine. That's when I realized she'd changed it. She had gone out of her way to make sure I couldn't look anymore. As if I hadn't already seen enough. I stood there in the dark hallway, holding the phone like it had betrayed me too. And I made a decision. One I didn't think I'd ever make. If I couldn't find the truth this way, I'd have to get it from someone else. And I knew exactly where to start. The hotel lobby smelled like pine and fabric softener. That overly sterilized scent meant to trick you into feeling calm, like you're in control of your choices. But I wasn't calm. I was standing 10 feet from the front desk, heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my ears, staring at a man I'd only seen once, in the alley behind the building. And he wasn't looking away. He didn't look surprised to see me. That's what got me. He looked expectant, like he knew I was coming eventually. He was drinking something from a paper cup, leaning against the lobby counter with one hand casually tucked into the front pocket of his jeans. There was no shock in his eyes, no panic. Just this unsettling steadiness, like I was a guest he'd been waiting to check in. I didn't speak right away. I didn't know how to start. What do you say to the man who's been silently unthreading your marriage behind your back? But he spoke first. You're Nolan, right? Just like that. Calm, almost bored. I nodded, but I didn't answer. My throat was dry. My hands were colder than they should have been, despite the thick coat I was wearing. He motioned toward the corner of the lobby, where there were 2 chairs and a table with a tiny fake plant in the middle. As if this was a meeting. As if we were about to negotiate terms. I followed him there. He sat down. I stayed standing. I was ready to explode. To ask him what he wanted from her. If he loved her. If he even knew her. But before I could say anything, he said, "She told me you might come." It was like someone dropped a metal pipe on the floor of my skull. She told him. She knew. She'd planned for this. I could feel heat rushing to my face, but I forced myself to stay still. How long? I asked. My voice didn't even sound like mine. It sounded hollow, mechanical. He didn't pretend not to understand. Almost 5 months. 5 months. 5 months of me making her tea, of sleeping next to her back, turned to me, of carrying groceries while she sent him hotel room selfies I'll never see, of planning our anniversary dinner while she was probably planning what to pack in her overnight bag. I sat down, finally, because my legs couldn't carry that weight standing. He took a sip from his cup and then added, "She said you stopped trying, that you checked out, long before I came around." And I laughed. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was the most weaponized lie I'd ever heard. I never stopped trying. I was the only one trying. She was the one pulling away, one toothbrush, one guest room night at a time. "You think you know her?" I asked, my voice sharper now. "You think what you're getting is the real version of her?" He didn't flinch, but he didn't argue either. That silence told me everything. "I know enough," he said finally. I stood back up. And maybe it was petty, maybe it was cruel, but I leaned forward and said, "You're just the next version of me. And she'll do to you exactly what she's doing to me, only slower, more politely, with a smile." His face twitched, just slightly, enough to let me know the words had landed. Then I left. No yelling, no threats, no fists. I walked out of that hotel lobby with my heart thudding and my lungs barely working, but I walked out taller. Because now I knew something he didn't. I wasn't the one who should be ashamed anymore. She was. That night, I didn't speak to Maribel at all. I went to bed early. Didn't wait up for her. She came in late. I heard the keys, the careful footsteps, the same dumb fake cough she always does to make noise as if she hadn't just spent 2 hours lying to my face by absence. She got into bed without saying anything. But now, everything had changed. I didn't want her back anymore. I wanted to know why she still hadn't left. And that question would lead to something far worse than cheating. She started being nice again. Not just fake nice, not the kind of pleasant that makes you feel like you're being handled, but the kind that felt careful, thought out. Every word placed like she was trying to rewrite a version of herself I'd already stopped believing in. She asked about my work again. She laughed at things I didn't think were funny. She started offering to cook, even though for the last 6 months she'd acted like boiling pasta was beneath her. But I didn't say anything. I just let it happen. Because something didn't feel right, not just with her, but with the way the walls had suddenly gone quiet. I hadn't mentioned the man at the hotel. I hadn't said a word about the receipts, the burner number message, or her changed phone security. I wanted to see what she would do if I said nothing. And the more silence I gave her, the more effort she poured into pretending things were fine. But now, it didn't feel like guilt anymore. It felt like containment, like she was managing a situation. And I started wondering, was the affair even the worst part? Or was it just the distraction? On a rainy Saturday afternoon, I was cleaning out the hallway closet when I found it. Not hidden, just misplaced in a way that seemed almost intentional. A small black accordion folder, the kind used for receipts or old tax documents. I opened it without thinking, and that's when I stopped breathing. There were documents inside, copies of bank statements. But not ours. Not the joint account. Not the mortgage or the credit cards we used together. These were new, from a separate bank entirely. I'd never seen the logo before. The statements were clean, minimal activity, consistent deposits, but the account name? It was hers. Just hers. Opened a year ago. And the deposits? Identical amounts every 2 weeks. Not from her job. From something else. A name I didn't recognize, Lanford Consulting, appeared over and over. Every other Friday. Like a salary. I took photos of every page with my phone, fingers shaking so hard the camera kept blurring. Then I found the folder inside the folder. It wasn't financial. It was printed emails. Threads. Between Maribel and someone named CJ. No last name. No formal headers. No signatures. But the tone, it wasn't romantic. It was business. They were discussing me. Not in abstract terms. In details. About my schedule. About my habits. About our marriage. They even referenced the name of the couple's therapist we had seen briefly 2 years ago. I hadn't thought about that woman in forever. I sat on the closet floor, knees to my chest, reading line after line of my life being dissected by strangers. It felt surgical, like I'd been a project. Or worse, a case file. One line hit me so hard I nearly dropped the paper. He's emotionally dependent, passive in conflict, and easily redirected. If we control the timeline, he won't fight back. Timeline. What timeline? This wasn't about cheating. This wasn't about falling out of love. This was a goddamn operation. Suddenly it all made sense. The weird change in her demeanor, the careful way she'd kept me just close enough to avoid suspicion, but distant enough to maintain control. The conversations she'd steered me away from. The nights locked in the guest room. The toothbrush. The late-night messages she meant for me to see, but just enough to keep me frozen in place. I thought I was the abandoned one. The broken one. The man being cheated on in silence. But no, I was being managed. Used. Prepped. I put the papers back exactly the way I found them. Closed the folder. Put it back behind the winter coats. Then I sat on the living room couch for hours without turning the TV on. Just staring. Listening to the storm outside. Trying to understand what game I'd been pulled into. That night, she came home smiling again. Called me babe. Sat next to me like nothing had happened. She even reached for my hand. And I let her hold it. But I was already gone. The real question wasn't why she was doing this anymore. The question now was who else knew. And in part 8, I'll tell you exactly what I found when I followed the money. Because there's one more betrayal coming. And this time, it isn't just personal. It's criminal. The next morning, I didn't go to work. I didn't go for a walk. I didn't pretend to be busy. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the papers I had scanned onto my laptop, watching the cursor blink on an empty email addressed to myself. My name, sitting alone in the to field, felt strange, like I was writing a confession to a version of me I'd abandoned long ago. For weeks, I'd been caught in this fog of betrayal and confusion, unsure what was real anymore. But now I had a choice. Not revenge, not confrontation, just choice. That, in itself, was a kind of power I hadn't felt in years. I didn't need to follow the money. Not really. I already understood enough. Whatever Lanford Consulting was, whatever timeline she was managing, whatever plan I'd been part of, it didn't matter anymore. Because I was no longer playing along. Maribel came home early that evening. She was wearing the same gray coat. Her hair pulled back neatly. Calm, polished, like someone who had practiced the day. But something in her eyes changed when she saw me sitting at the table. There was no anger in me. Just clarity. I found the folder, I said. She didn't deny it. Didn't ask what folder. She just blinked slowly, as if she had rehearsed this moment too, but didn't like the script I was choosing. I don't want to know all the details, I said. I don't need to. I just want to know one thing. She sat down across from me. Quiet. Bracing. Was any of it ever real? She looked away. Her hands folded. Then she did something I didn't expect. She started to cry. Not dramatically. Not with gasping or excuses. Just silent tears falling onto her hands. And for a moment, I didn't see the version of her I'd been living with. I saw the person I married. Or maybe the person she used to be, before it all fell apart. Yes, she said, barely above a whisper. But I lost it. I didn't know how to fix it. So I redirected. It wasn't an answer, but it was enough. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I didn't try to make her explain things that couldn't be explained. I stood up, got my keys, and I left. Not forever, just long enough to think clearly. I rented a cabin 2 hours away. 1 bedroom. No TV. No Wi-Fi. Just pine trees and silence, and a notebook. I stayed for 4 days. I turned off my phone. I wrote. I walked. I cooked simple food. I slept without panic. I remembered who I was before I spent all my energy trying to save something that had already been abandoned. And on the 5th morning, I opened the window and breathed in a kind of quiet I hadn't felt in years. When I drove back, Maribel was gone. No note. No dramatic farewell. Just gone. She had taken the gray coat, her books, and the folder. She left behind the cast iron pan she always hated. A photo of us from 3 years ago, the one where I'm laughing, and she's holding a coffee cup mid-sentence. I looked at that photo for a long time. Then I put it in a drawer. It's been 7 months since that day. I'm okay now. Actually, I'm better than okay. I started going to therapy, not because I was broken, but because I wanted to understand why I stayed so long in a story where I was only written into the background. I moved into a smaller place, a quiet apartment with creaky floors and a view of a tree I've started naming squirrels in. I met someone too. Slowly. Carefully. I didn't tell her about Maribel right away. I didn't need to. This time, I'm not trying to prove my worth by being useful or agreeable. I just show up. Present. Honest. Some nights, I still think about that locked door. That first toothbrush. The version of me that stood there asking himself what he did wrong. But now, I know the answer. It wasn't what I did. It was what I kept forgiving. And walking away from that, it didn't feel like losing. It felt like breathing again.